Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. This is Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star. I am joined today by my colleague, Bruce Pascoe, our intrepid men's basketball reporter. He's checking in from the man cave at his home in Midtown Tucson. Bruce, how are you?
Good. It's just I'm in a storage room actually. I sort of converted it with this AC unit you can see over there. That's about it.
You gotta learn how to do the green screen thing and figure out which things are over.
Yeah, something more interesting maybe. Yeah. So back one time somebody saw this and he texted me and he says, "Are you in a bar?" No, it's not a bar. It's just a storage room.
No, we're not drinking on this particular episode of the Wildcast. We are going to talk extensively about what's going on with men's basketball. We thank everybody for joining us. As always, you can find the Wildcast on Apple, Spotify. You can watch us in video form on our website at tucson.com, where you can also find all of our content. As we are recording this on Wednesday morning, Bruce, the NBA draft combine is either still going or wrapping up in Chicago, and Carter Bryant of Arizona is one of the participants, and he is a hot name on a lot of draft boards and mock drafts. Let's just start with this. Do you think he's as good as gone?
I don't think it's 100%, but I think when this started out, it was kind of sounding like a 50-50 deal, but I kind of think it's maybe more like 90-10 that he leaves at this point. If he, a lot of the projections have him even higher now. We'll see how he does I haven't seen all the test results yet this week, but I know 3 years ago, that's when they really fell in love with Dalen Terry. He blew up when they measured his hand size and his reach and all that stuff. And some of that stuff, kind of comes out that you can't really see as a college player, especially when you're in a certain role like Carter Bryant was in, a limited role. If he tests out well and he does well in the drills, that maybe adds a little bit to his, upside, because, the scouts need some context, around what he did at U of A and then kind of envisioning what his potential is. So, but anyway, it does seem like he's kind of projected in that top 20 range. And even with NIL kind of pulling guys back to the college, it still seems if you're in that top 20 range and you're pretty certain of leaving or pretty certain of getting that pick, then you stay. And certainly if you're top 10, then it's almost automatic, because you can't take the risk of getting hurt if you go back to college. So he hasn't closed the door, but it certainly would indicate the way it's trending that most likely he will leave, I would think.
After the lottery was conducted on Monday, which the Dallas Mavericks humorously won for the rights to Cooper Flag, everyone put out their latest mock drafts. I have a theory that NBA mock drafts are more accurate than NFL mock drafts. I think the agent world, I think they're a little bit more open in the NBA. There's less variance. There's certain like a smaller pool of players to pick from than in football. So when you see Carter Bryant going 14th in ESPN's mock or 12th in the Athletics mock, I think that's a pretty accurate reflection of what the league thinks of him. And for me, the biggest difference in his situation now versus, let's say, a month or two ago is when you're projected in the top half of the first round versus the 20 to 30 area. It's just sort of hard to say no to that.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially because that if you are in that top 20, or if you're in that 20 to 30 range, and then maybe they start saying high second round, how many times I don't know how many times you've seen this, where then all of a sudden these international guys, you get to that point in the draft and all these international guys are popping in the 20 to 30 range. And then the guy you're thinking of slips to the second round. And especially with NIL now, if you're in that range, why bother risking it? In fact, Boogie Fland, and I think there's a couple other guys, certainly JT Toppin, already some of these guys who were projected in that range or in the second round just said, forget it. I'm going back to college and I'm going to make more money and I don't have to worry about slipping on draft night, But again, Carter Bryant could be above that conversation. If he goes through these workouts and nobody kind of he doesn't, him and his agents don't get any guarantees or assurances. There are pretty good indications that he's top 20. Then maybe he does come back. But, I think they're going to know, and it should be pretty clear in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I guess on Tuesday he had one of the best, what they call max vertical jumps, which is a running vertical jump. If anyone's ever seen how they do it for the NFL, it's stand still, right? You're standing in one spot and you go up and try to hit the thing. So they do that and a running one. So he had one of the best of those. I guess he didn't shoot very well yesterday and when they were doing 3-pointers, but I'm not sure that really matters because we all saw him shoot well in actual games, in clutch situations, as a pretty raw freshman. I do think that he needs a lot of work in his game. He doesn't really have like an intermediate element, like beating you off the dribble. I mean, it's all pretty much dunks and 3-pointers, but people love the 3-and-D potential that he could bring. And, the earlier you go, you're theoretically going to a worse team, but there's teams like San Antonio out there with 2. I think they have the 2 and the 14 who are kind of on the brink of contention. They have Victor Wembanyama. Stefan Castle did really well this past season from UConn. Man, he'd be a great fit with an organization like that, I think, as someone who, again, really good disruptive defender and someone who can knock down a 3-point shot. He also measured at over 6'6" in bare feet. I don't know why they do barefoot measurements because they don't play in bare feet. Yeah. So he's probably like 6'8" in shoes, and he's like 225 pounds already, right? And he's only 19 years old. So all of those things, I think, are reasons that teams are attracted to him. What do you think about him as a kid? I was never in a press conference where he was interviewed. I'm sure you spent more time around him than I have. What do you think about him as just a young man?
I think he's a top tier character guy. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. His parents are rock solid. His dad is a high school coach who's played college basketball and knows the ins and outs of everything. And his mom was an athlete. His aunt, was a volleyball player here at Arizona. I mean, there's just athletic genes in that family, and it does seem like, sometimes, you interview a kid like that and, it's almost too polished, like he's always saying the right thing. But I think even beyond that, I think he's generally a good character guy. So I think that's going to help him, and that should come out in the team interviews. And that's the other thing, the combine, we talk about the measurements, and measurements are important. The shooting really isn't important because you're right, they see them. But the measurements are important, the agility a little bit, whatever. But I think the thing teams really like sometimes is the fact that they get to interview these guys directly, and they can throw all kinds of questions at them to try and throw them off and, see what their character really is about. And I would think he would do pretty well in those things.
So spinning this into the Arizona direction and looking at what the team might resemble without Carter Bryant on the roster, can they get anybody at this point out of the portal, or maybe someone who drops out of the draft who could quote unquote replace him? And if you're not watching this on video, I'm doing the little hand quote sign because I don't think that at this point they can find anyone who's as good as Carter Bryant, but maybe they can make up for his production. What do you think about that?
Yeah, probably at this point, there's a couple of guys that maybe are going to withdraw from the draft that they might have a shot at, but those guys are probably also going to be really high, seeking a lot of NIL money. And I'm not sure the spot that they have for Bryant would justify that, because, if you give a guy a huge bag and it can disrupt what everybody else is making or whatever. And there's that to consider. I don't think there's a lot of, I think this is an unusual year in particularly because there's just not a lot of transfer talent left at this point, because they've all rushed to sign these NIL deals before the house settlement becomes complete, when they're going to be scrutinized. So guys are getting crazy amounts to go places, and they're already locked up. There's just not a whole lot out there. But I kind of think that they can maybe get a complimentary piece out there. It's possible there is another international player or two. It seems like late every spring, one or two of those pops up that we haven't even heard of, and then all of a sudden they're going to play a role. So there could be somebody like that. And then, failing that, if they, they could possibly get a piece like a Seth Henderson or an Anthony Dillon, so kind of a low major transfer, maybe. But I think a lot of those guys are even spoken for at this point. But I think even if they go with what they have, barring injury, they're not in terrible shape, really. They've still got Del Orso back. A lot of people question who's going to replace Bryant in the starting lineup. Well, he wasn't in the starting lineup and Del Orso was. So I know, so there's not really a change there. There's just not that, that upside, that huge upside that Carter Bryant has. If he comes back for a sophomore year, you can imagine how much better he could be. And then they have Dwayne Everstode, kind of a springy, raw wing that played. Well, he was hurt this year, went to Brewster Academy. He's from Netherlands originally. If he comes back, he's kind of a wild card. He could be a guy that maybe helps out there. And if Bryant doesn't come back, maybe he gets a little more minutes and he becomes something. It's really hard to say, And then I think Koa Pete, he's such a good all around talent that, he could play, 3, 4, 5 if he has to, and kind of soak up some minutes. So they have ways, again, if they stay healthy, that they could probably survive and still have a pretty good team even without him.
I feel like as last season was ending and Arizona was putting together this, top ranked recruiting class, I think number 2, according to 247, their ranking. So let's just say top 5 nationally. And then, the possibility of Carter Bryant coming back, fans were thinking this is the Final Four team. This is going to be Tommy Lloyd's best team. I feel like we have to pump the brakes a little bit on that because they're going to be so reliant on freshmen. I think more so than any Tommy Lloyd coach team has been. Koa Pete almost certainly is going to start, right? Yeah. Braden Burries could start too. They could bring Anthony Del Orso off the bench. You talked about Aristode. Bryce James, we don't know what his role is going to be. They're bringing in a couple developmental kids from overseas too. Probably aren't going to play all that much, but regardless, like when you look at the top 7 or 8, it's a high percentage of freshmen. Are they relying too much on freshmen, do you think, if they're viewing themselves as a Final Four team or a national contender?
Well, I think, they have, the thing is, the 2 freshmen they would be relying on the most are very mature, experienced players in Pete and Braden Burries. Burries is actually really could arguably be going into his sophomore year. He's that old. I believe he's going to be 20 as next year starts. So he's an older guy. Koa Pete's just been precocious. He's been a college player almost since 8th grade. He's just that kind of guy. And of course, they'll have to adjust to the game, but especially both of them, have played high level. Koa Pete's played for every USA basketball junior team you can imagine. He's going to play for Tommy Lloyd's U19 team this summer, so he'll have he'll be a freshman, but he's not. He should be pretty ready to go. And then I think the other key is they got Jaden Bradley back at point guard, and he's going to be a 4th-year player. And so there's experience at probably the most important position to have that experience. And then up front, Krivas and Awaka are veteran guys. Del Orso, he's a veteran guy. He has some shortcomings in certain parts of the game, but certainly he's an experienced guy, and he'll be in his 2nd year of the system. So I don't think it's too much. And then, I think a lot of these freshmen are going to be developmental. The 2 kids with African roots, I think Bryce James is a developmental guy. And Aristode, we'll see. He could be a developmental guy. Maybe he helps him a little bit. So I think at the core, I think they have enough experience. But to say they're Final Four ready, I don't think they're going to be predicted to be that good unless Carter Bryant comes back, maybe. But they're still in decent shape, I think, experience wise.
Yeah, if on the as you put it at a 90 to 10% ratio, if that part of that 10% comes in and Carter Bryant comes back, I think the expectations are highly elevated. A couple thoughts on some things you mentioned. Braden Burries, I guess, is kind of the anti-Kylan Boswell, who for his entire freshman year, right. There was always he's 17 years old. I don't think people are going to go out of their way to mention that Braden Burries is 20 years old, but it's a good thing for Arizona if he's a little bit more mature physically and mentally. And then with Anthony Del Orso, I hope right now, whenever this podcast is published, that Anthony is in the weight room somewhere, putting on some muscle, because that's what he really needs, I think, more than anything, is to put on a little bit of bulk heading into his last season at the U of A. You mentioned how, they got a veteran front line with Motiejus Krivas and Toby Awaka. We saw Krivas only minimally last year, and he might not ever have been 100%. Health-wise, what are your expectations for him heading into this upcoming season?
Wow, it's tough to say. I think, I assume he's going to be back fully healthy, and then you kind of go on that projection he was last year. I mean, entering last year, he was projected to go. He was a projected first round pick, which is unusual for a guy with that kind of size and bulk. But he does have some elements in his game where he can shoot from mid range. He's somewhat mobile, but you're right. We didn't see a lot of that this year, and the whole team was kind of discombobulated that first month or so of the season. He tried to play, wasn't really himself. So I think you kind of have to go back to his freshman year, and especially the end of it, and project ahead. And I think he could be a factor. What I don't really understand is if him and Awaka can play together, and how would that work? And certainly they're both really, really good college players. It's just the question of how they would complement each other on the floor, or do they just each play a flat 20 minutes, or how is that going to shake out? I don't really know, but I think that ideally sometimes having them combine and then having Pete as well in there, for those two spots, to have those three guys for those two post spots primarily, if that works out, that could be really effective.
Yeah, I feel like they need one more piece of some sort of veteran. Doesn't necessarily have to be a top tier player, but maybe someone who could play a forward, a 3-4, or a wing, someone just with some experience. Like you said, the portal activity isn't quite done yet. They definitely could add someone, even though the pool of players isn't as deep as maybe we've seen in some previous years because of timing with the house settlement and all that. But when you do look at who they've lost and who they've brought in, the only addition, I believe, is Evan Nelson, right? From Harvard, a local kid. And they lost,
in the portal,
among others, KJ Lewis, Henry Visar, Emmanuel Stephan, and Conrad Martinez. So given all of that, do you feel like it was kind of a net negative? Are they one of the quote unquote losers?
Well, the transfer portal, I think there was some national conversation that they were losers in the portal, and they're net losers. Okay, that's true. But they also have, the number 2 freshman class or something coming in. So it's all kind of about the same. I mean, would you rather have Cole Pete and Braden Birdies or a couple of mid-major transfers? I think most people would rather have Cole Pete and Braden Birdies, and they're going to take some time to adjust, but they should be really good college players by January, if not before, of next season. So, this is just one of those deals. And, and it'll be interesting to see. Maybe Evan Nelson does help him a little bit around the edge. I don't know. He played at a lot lower level at Harvard, but he's a pretty experienced player, obviously high basketball IQ. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe he can help him a tiny bit here or there. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you don't want Jaden Bradley to play as many minutes as he did last year.
Right.
So that's a reason they, went out and pursued a backup point guard. Felt like he kind of wore down at times a little bit over the course of the season. So something to monitor, to be sure, moving forward. You talked to Evan, didn't you?
Yeah. No, he's super excited. I mean, it's one of those deals, those Ivy League players can't go back as graduates that are not allowed. So they basically have to go somewhere else. And for him to get a chance to come here, I think it was, basically a dream come true is what he said. I mean, because, the funny thing was I asked him, when he got hurt, I think he got hurt junior year. But you know, if you're an Ivy League player and you get hurt and you're a good Ivy League player, that's always the silver lining, is you're going to get a chance to play a high level, you know, as a fifth year. And now there's NIL in the mix too. You can actually make some money while you're doing it. So no, he's excited. I mean, I don't think they'll have any problems, you know, getting full effort out of him. It'll be interesting to see is can he earn the trust of Tommy Lloyd more than Conrad Martinez, who pretty much, other than a couple of spots here there, surprisingly in the Duke game, in the tournament, Martinez played a few minutes and, you know, pretty much held his own. But otherwise, Martinez was not out there in moments when they you know, were in kind of crunch time. I think he played at Iowa State when they were in real trouble and Tommy Lloyd just needed to shake it up. And he did well in that game. But for the most part, he didn't earn that trust. And we'll see. Maybe Evan Nelson can, you know, I don't know. But you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, Jaden Bradley's efficiency went down quite a bit this year, having to play as many minutes as he did. And, you know, he's you know, pretty tireless guy, doesn't mind playing it, but it's just a matter of he probably would be more effective if he could play more like 33, 34 minutes a game instead of 38, which is basically what he was averaging in close games.
You've mentioned NIL a couple of times through your reporting or just your conversations that you've had with people. Like, what does, you know, Arizona's NIL budget look like nowadays, and how does that compare with some of the other, you know, teams that you consider blue bloods or kind of top 25 programs?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. There's not a lot of people. It does seem like it's probably top 25, but maybe towards the bottom of the top 25. I mean, you know, nobody will really tell you. It's very very opaque. All this stuff is, but you know, but I think the budget sort of thing this year is kind of combined with this revenue sharing that's kicking in from the school. So when you're talking about budget, it's NIL and rev share. I'm guessing, from what I can tell, Arizona's in the 8 to 10 million range. I think maybe a tiny bit more than that, because I know they've got about 4 on the revenue side. So if they, you know, and I think they probably have, I know they had about 3, I think, on the NIL side last year. Probably went up, maybe it even doubled. You know, that's been hard to find out. So yeah, and whereas you're seeing some things out there nationally that some of these teams have, you know, upwards of 20 million in their budget, and it just seems insane. But you know, there is that happening, and we'll see after this House thing kicks in, maybe that tempers down a little bit, and you know, because at that point, you know, these NIL deals, as part of the House settlement, the part of the rule is the NIL deals, if they're more than $600, are supposed to be audited and scrutinized, so to make sure they're of market value. So, you know, how they're going to define market value, you know, is going to be interesting. But in any case, it could mean those NIL dollars go down, you know, maybe a little bit, at least from what's being reported or whatever.
NIL is such a huge deal in college sports now, but you can't ever get anybody to talk about it on the record. And in fact, certain states are moving to make that information unFOIA-able, right? So that we'll kind of never know what anyone's making unless someone wants to talk about it. And I've said this before, but I'd kind of feel like a jerk if I brought it up in a press conference, like, hey, how much money did Arizona offer you to come and play here? Like, it's just it's strange, the place that holds. In this, but it's a huge deal, right? I mean, it's a huge factor in why guys go from one school to another.
Right. And nobody would ever say, even if you did ask that question, because they don't have to say, and they know that it's all behind the curtain, so they don't have to. You know, the only reason figures are getting out there for the most part, I think agents are talking about it, and that's why you have to wonder, is it inflated at all? Because sometimes agents are trying to make, you know, drive up the value of what their players are getting, you know, and so it's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on out there. But also I've talked to some NBA scouts about it, and I think there's also a lot of truth to it, that these 10, 15 million, $20 million budgets are pretty legit. I mean, one NBA guy I talked to said they're actually having trouble finding guys that would agree to two-way contracts, because any, you know, especially the guys who have eligibility back, why would you take a two-way contract for $600,000 when you can make NIL that's well beyond that? If you're that caliber player who would get a two-way contract, you can make more money in college. So they're actually struggling with that, which is just crazy. So there's some truth to what all that's going on. And you're right, to your point about the states. A lot of states have gone this way. I think they feel it's a competitive thing, that they don't want the numbers to be out there. So other schools in other states can say, well, that guy is only getting this at Arizona or whatever. So they've made this public record shield, which one of the guys at Open Doors, a contact I have there, told me that there's I think more states are moving in that direction. And it's frustrating for us because we won't be able to get them. It's interesting in the sense that you could be the best player on the team. You could be making more money than the U of A president, but you're not considered an employee, and your salary or your compensation, whatever you want to call it, won't be made public. That's an interesting situation, that some of the highest paid people on campus won't even have their salaries available. But that is proving to be pretty common the way things are moving.
You wonder what those people really think about that situation too, the academics, realizing that student athletes are making more money than them. But anyway, one more thing before we get into our final topic, and our final topic is going to be the schedule for next year. But Arizona did make a change in their coaching staff. Steve Robinson retired, and he has been replaced by Brandon Chappell. It's pronounced Chappelle, right? Even though it's sort of spelled more like chapel.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about Brandon? What's his background? What does he bring to the table? And how will this just kind of change the dynamic of the coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, it brings, Steve Robinson was kind of that guy. He joined Tommy Lloyd's first staff when Jason Terry went to the G League late that summer, right before Tommy Lloyd started his first year. And so he went to Robinson, I think partly because, it was Tommy Lloyd's first year as a head coach, even though he was groomed to be a head coach forever at Gonzaga. And he brought in that experienced guy that had been everywhere, mostly under Roy Williams, but also, he'd been a head coach himself. So he didn't have that piece. Most of the guys on Lloyd's staff were and still kind of are on the younger side. So for those years, he had Robinson kind of be that extra voice. And I think with Chappelle, you get kind of another younger coach, but also he's got a fair amount of experience. And he's got a good decade plus as a coach, and he's kind of an all-around guy that I think fits in with what they do, or he can do a lot of different things, and I think he's going to probably be a little more active recruiter, and particularly has ties to Texas, which for obvious reasons is important for Arizona, because they really had no natural recruiting ties to Texas on the staff before, but now they do. And he's from Texas. He played at Lamar. He coached at UT, obviously, before he came here. So, that might help Arizona in that sense, especially being in the Big 12. That's still kind of their traditional footprint, at least. And, even though NIL changes so much about recruiting, it still helps to have those kind of ties. So I think there's that. And, he has a bond with Jack Murphy. He started basically, or he was a GA under Murphy at NAU for a couple of years. And, they kind of grew that way. So, I think it seems to be a pretty promising fit for them.
Yeah, women's basketball did something similar in putting together their staff, bringing a coach with Texas ties. It's essential nowadays, right? Like, you're going to be playing a bunch of your games in the state of Texas. It's obviously huge population areas of Houston and Dallas where there's just tons of good players. Arizona needs to get in on that. They need people who know people in those areas, and I think both programs have done that. So, Speaking of the schedule, we don't know how many games they're going to play in Texas this year, but we do know that Arizona men's basketball is going to open the regular season against Florida in Las Vegas. That'd be your defending national champion. They're going to play UCLA in Los Angeles at the Intuit Dome, right? The new Clippers arena. They're going to play at UConn, which is part of a home and home. Auburn's going to come here. They're going to play Alabama in Birmingham. And then we just learned this week that the game that they're going to play in Phoenix is going to be against San Diego State, which has been a very solid, quote unquote, mid-major program.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot to me. Do you think that this is an overly ambitious schedule or the type of schedule that Arizona should be playing?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think it's the type of schedule they should be playing, especially this year. They have, like we were talking earlier, they're not going to be the most experienced, but they're experienced enough, they're talented enough that they need to test themselves a little bit. And to me, the main thing is we got like 6 high caliber opponents here in the non-conference schedule, but they're losing 2 in the Big 12. Big 12 is going from 20 to 18, and we don't know which games they're going to cut, but it's likely they will only play Iowa State once for sure, because they played them twice this last year, and they're cutting from 18 to 20. So there's not going to be as many double play games. There's only going to be a handful of them, and one of them is going to be ASU. So, potentially, and that means they may only play Kansas once. They may only play Houston once again. We don't know yet. So they're going to lose 2 potentially high level games in the Big 12. And then the other thing is they're not going to Maui or Atlantis or any of the high level MTEs. They're having their own at McHale. It's going to be kind of like mid-major teams. So they're lacking that potential. Usually when you go to those, it's, there's usually at least a couple of games that are going to be kind of high level, and they don't have those. So it kind of comes out in the wash, because you figure they would get 2 in an MTE, and then maybe another 1 or 2 if they in those Big 12 games of high level, and then you'd have 3 or 4 games left over in your non-conference, and that's basically what they have. It's basically a pretty normal schedule when you consider those 2 things.
It is certainly more fun for fans to have those types of games to look forward to in the off season. High profile, nationally televised, a lot of buzz and excitement around those. So I think that's cool. There's kind of what's always fascinated me about their scheduling is there's kind of no in between, really. It's kind of like either high profile opponents or like bye games, BUY, or sometimes they might be viewed as BYE games too, because they're usually so easy. And a lot of those end up being at McHale Center. So while it's fun for the fans to have those games to look forward to and watch them on TV, you don't necessarily get a lot of the high-profile opponents to watch in person. Auburn being the one exception, at least so far this year. What do you think about going from 20 to 18 conference games? Why did they do that, and do you like it?
Well, I mean, all I know is that I think Bill Self and maybe some others. Bill Self was public about it. Maybe some others were privately, but he felt it was too many, and so that's the thought. I don't really understand it, honestly. If you're going to have this powerhouse conference and you're going to have, especially if I was an executive at ESPN or whatever, and I had to deal with them, I'd be like, why aren't you guys giving us more inventory? Play 20 games. They're playing 18. It's just puzzling to me. I think that the thought is maybe I think Tommy Lloyd even kind of felt this way. I think the problem with playing 20, I think the problem was the league playing 20, they want to keep all the conference games after Christmas. They don't want to play those 2 early ones like the Pac-12 did, like the Big Ten does, and some others. So therefore, if you're going to cram them all after Christmas to play 20, you're pretty much going to have to do it without bye weeks or half bye weeks or whatever you want to call them in basketball, where you only play 1 game. And that is something to consider, because it really is a grind to play 2 tough games every week, and the way the Big 12 schedule was, a lot of times that means you're traveling every week, for 10 weeks in a row, and then playing a home game or whatever. And that was a grind. So I think that was I think that was another big reason why they did this. They're like, well, if we're going to combine it if we're going to play them all after Christmas, we have to go to 18 and have a half bye week. But what I don't understand is why not play a couple games early in December that gets people going a little bit, a little preview of the conference play. And, I think it worked for the Pac-12 actually the few years they did it before it all blew up. And I think it kind of works for the Big Ten, but they for whatever reason they decided not to. So again, that's why Arizona kind of had to fill their non-conference with some decent games in December, because they're not getting it from the conference.
Yeah, they could totally package those games too, make it some sort of marketing pitch.
Well,
to generate excitement around those December conference games if they wanted to.
Well, yeah, and
they don't want to.
Right. I was going to say the Pac-12 tried they tried to do it around the football championship game, and they were thinking that it would create some buzz or whatever, and it didn't really work. But I still think that at least it got people starting to think, hey, these are conference games, and you could do something. They could probably do more like that. Maybe even hold a couple basketball games in the same city as the conference football championship or something like that. But that they're not going that direction.
So the math works a lot easier and cleaner if you have 20 games, because you've got 16 teams that play men's basketball. So you 15 opponents, right? You play 10 times, or once a piece against 10 of those teams, and then twice a piece against 5, and that adds up to 20. If my math is correct here, Bruce, with 18, you would play 12 teams once and 3 teams twice to add up to 18. Is that correct?
3 teams, yeah.
3 teams twice would be 6 games, and then 12 teams once.
Right.
12.
That's exactly
that's your 18.
Right. And they've committed to keeping the rivalries. So if you have a rivalry, Colorado doesn't, for example, but Arizona is always going to still play ASU. So that means U of A has only got 2 double play possibilities, and and that won't be the double plays they had this year. It might be UCF or something, who knows. But I think it's always interesting to me with scheduling, how much does the television have to do with it? Because again, if you're ESPN, you're like, Arizona and Kansas have to play twice. We need that inventory. They didn't do that this year. Brett Yormark actually said at the preseason media day, yeah, we really need to rethink that. And so he kind of indicated that Arizona and Kansas would, take a priority. So that could be interesting. Maybe they give that as a double play for Arizona, and then that leaves one more space. Maybe if the television's influencing, maybe they have a home with Houston. Maybe they make that,
or BYU, which is going to be
BYU would be
super highly ranked this year, right?
Yeah.
The number 1 player coming in, and
bringing
a lot of guys back.
Yeah, that actually could, and that could be, really appealing to the television, and also obviously regionally, it's interesting. Since they have to go to play at Utah next year, they played Utah only here this year. They could even combine that for a double road trip, which I know they try to, but it's hard because of the geography in the league. But there's some opportunities there where they could do that, and maybe make it easier on teams. Although that said, I think Kansas went to Utah, played both those teams, and lost both those games, and it was a disaster. But
maybe that's why Bill Self said, yeah, we're playing too.
Well, he actually said, yeah, that, I mean, maybe it might have gotten worse, but he actually said something before last season. He said 20 is too many. He was against the start. So I think that, combined with the fact that they didn't like not having any buys at all in January and February, that just did it. And the coaches bent that way. And, it seems like the television partners are okay with it. So.
All right. Last question, and last related topic. Do you think that playing that extremely difficult schedule last year helped Arizona at the end of the day? The narrative that we all kind of pushed, and I think there was definitely some truth to this, was that they're going to be tougher, right? Like there's nothing they will have not seen before they get to the NCAA tournament. No, there are no quote unquote road games against Cal and Stanford where there's no one in the stands. They will have played physical teams. They will have played in hostile environments. All that being said, they ended up with a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they had to play number 1 seed Duke in the Sweet 16, and they lost.
Yeah.
So did it benefit them in the long run to have played that type of schedule, which they're obviously pursuing again this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think slightly it probably helped him. I think the thing, the 4 and the Duke seed, honestly, They probably could have avoided all that if they just beat BYU at home, and then we all know why what happened in that game. And so, they may have, if they had beaten BYU at home, they might have been, easily an elite 8 team, because they wouldn't have gotten Duke probably. So there's just weird things like that are always like what ifs you can think about. But I think, it's interesting, because I think beginning of the year, I thought, oh my God, this schedule is going to wear them out, and they're going to end on road games at Iowa State and Kansas on successive weekends, and then go back from the Big 12 tournament and and not have any bye weeks. I really thought that they would just limp into the tournament and probably be done after the second round. But they got there. They actually played pretty well in the Big 12 tournament, got to the championship of that game, played well against Houston, which made it all the way to the championship of the NCAAs. And so they showed some toughness there against, Texas Tech, Iowa, against Houston, and then in the tournament, I think it probably helped them beat Oregon. Honestly, if they were back in the Pac-10, Pac-12, maybe they don't have the resolve to win that game. And I think just in general, this team was a little tougher. So I think it did a little bit, but maybe not as much as everybody hyped up about. Oh, they're going to be just tough and ready to go out of the Big 12. I never really bought a whole lot of stock in that, but it probably did help them a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for getting a top 3 seed in the tournament and avoiding that 1 seed as long as you possibly can. I mean, that Duke team was really loaded. They're going to have 3 picks in the lottery upcoming in the NBA draft. And if you could have waited another round to play them, and who knows what happens at that point. There's no guarantee you win that Sweet 16 game, no matter who you play, but delaying that matchup against the 1 seed seems like it would be beneficial for Arizona or for anyone moving forward. The NBA draft takes place in late June, so we still have a long way to go. Swinging back to our conversation from the beginning here, Bruce, as we wrap up the pod, what's the timeline for Carter Bryant to make an announcement or make a decision so that we can, move on with our lives one way or the other?
He has 2 weeks, basically. I think it's the 29th this year. And so I don't know that he'll go to the deadline. I think if he gets some pretty good, solid guarantees, the assurances that he would be, top 15, top 20, and he decides to stay, could be before that, maybe even shortly after the combine. But if he's on the border, maybe he's going to do a bunch of workouts, and maybe he does go down to the wire. But it will certainly, by the end of the month, we will know one way or another on that. And then, we'll see.
And at that point, we will have a better idea of what Arizona's roster will look like in 25-26. We might not know all of the players. There still could be an addition. Coming up here, especially if Carter decides to leave. I feel like I said earlier, they need one more veteran to bring in to kind of balance things out with all the freshmen that they have. Anyway, thank you so much to our colleague Bruce Pascoe for joining us on this latest episode of the Wildcast. Bruce will continue to cover all things Arizona men's basketball through the spring and summer. There is always news on this beat. You can check out my work on our website. I'm covering baseball and softball right now as softball starts the postseason in the Tucson Regional on Friday against Santa Clara. The other teams in the regional are Ole Miss and Grand Canyon. Baseball has its final regular season series. They are at Houston. That is a Thursday through Saturday series, and then they are in the Big 12 tournament in Arlington next week. You can, of course, listen to us on Apple and Spotify. Like I said, you can watch the video version if you want to check out Bruce's storage room. That video will be up on Tucson.com. Bruce is shaking his head. Again, thank you so much to everyone for listening. Thank you to Bruce for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.